Hey guys, we're going to be revisiting the Peavey Tour 450. I've had this amp for a few years now, so now it's I'm going to have a better grasp on what the amp does. Obviously, I have a better way to record it than when I did a few years ago. So we're going to look at it again, and we're going to see how it turns out. If you guys remember, a few years back, I did a video on this amp, and that was as soon as I got it. It's a very low quality video. I was younger when I did it, so the amp wasn't, of course, it wasn't fully justified, at least to the best of my abilities. And there aren't very many videos on this amp particularly, so I thought that I would go back and I would revisit the amp and give it a review and a demo. You know, it's the Peavey Tour Series 450. They also have the 700, and that model was actually used by Paul Gray sometimes. He didn't use it, I think, on tour. I don't think he used it all the time, but if you watch some of the behind the bass player stuff, you'll see him using a Tour 700 on there. So these tour heads, a lot of people are using, you know, from Ice Set to Kill, Dragon Force. So it's a very popular head. It's a solid state head. No tubes, no preamp tubes, no power tubes. It's built really well. It handles 450 watts at 4 ohms, so it is really cool. And it's got a graphic EQ that is bypassable, which is also really cool, so it opens up the options really well. Out of the box, it's just going to come with the head itself. I got it new. It doesn't come with a speaker cable or anything. It just has the power cable that comes with the amp that will go into the wall. And it's a rack mountable head, so you're going to have to get at least a 2-space rack, because it takes 2 spaces. If you don't know about these rack mounts, they go by spaces. 1 space is essentially like that tuner that you've seen by Korg or by Boss, the rack mountable tuner. That's 1 space. This takes 2 spaces, so essentially what 2 of those will take. I have a 3-space rack, so I actually have space for a tuner or something on the bottom. I used to have a BBE Sonic Maximizer down there. Right now I just use it for extra storage. But yeah, you're going to have to get one of these, and these run from anywhere from, I got this one for $150 all the way up to, you know, $300 if you want like an actual flight case. And I say you're gonna have to because even the lightest gigging that you're gonna do with this, it leaves the unit exposed. Not the fact that it's just protected, but it's going to be exposed to the elements. Everything is open, kind of the fans in the back, things up front are all open. So as soon as water touches it, as soon as water gets into it, and even when I pan in close, you'll see that the wires are exposed in this the graphic EQ. It will mess up your unit, you know. So it's not weatherproof, of course, and so it's made like this for a reason. It is supposed to go inside of a rack, so you're going to have to get a rack unit. I cannot stress that enough. And I did gig with this without one for a few shows, and it was very scary. It was incredibly scary. I almost dropped it a few times. It's very heavy towards the end over here. It's not very heavy towards the back, so you know it's not something that you want to lightly carry. And it's not something that you're going to be able to replace very easily because it's not, you know, a cheap amp. Albeit, you know, it's a greatly priced amp, but it's not, you know, something you want to break and get another one of. So let's check this amp out up close. All the way over here on the left, you've got the high gain and low gain. So this is equivalent to active and passive. The low gain is just a padded input. So if you have an active bass, or if you have you know, something that just generally is a high output instrument, something that, you know, gives a high output, you want to put it in the low gain. Otherwise, the high gain is a 0 dB cut just straight into the amp. Right over here, it's got a bright switch. If you click it on, it gives you a bright boost, so it gives you a treble boost, and you can click it off. The outward position is off. Here is a mute, and I'm not too sure that this is necessary because I've got a rig and I've got a tuner, and if I click that on, it'll silence me. I've got a volume knob at my bass that'll silence me. And some people can, you know, have expression pedals that go out front, and that'll silence them. This doesn't come with any kind of foot switch that will activate
that, so I don't see a practical use of going back to your amp and hitting this to mute yourself. I only imagine you ever having to need this when you just have this head and maybe just a cabinet and you're out doing something for a practice or something like that. But there's nothing, there's no real use that you're gonna have with this. It does have smart rail technology, which right off the bat I don't know what that is, so I'm gonna have a description on what that is, and maybe that helps on why you would want this particular mute. But it doesn't come with a foot switch, so that you can activate it out front where you're gonna be. So again, no practical use for that mute, but it is there. It's got a light next to it so that it lets you know that this is on and that your amp is functioning and not just not making any noise. Up here we've got a pre-gain, which is of course just the volume that is going into the amp, so the volume of your bass going into the amp. Underneath that you've got a contour knob, and this is really cool. This is actually a mid-range sweep knob, and what this does is it scoops your mids, and if you have it kind of all the way up, it's a really good slap tone. If you have it all the way down, it lets all the mids through without anything being affected, and having it midway, of course, is a blending of half and half. This is really interesting. This is I use this a lot, actually, especially when I switch from fingerstyle picking to going into a pick. So this is really cool. In the middle section, we've got the heart of what you're really going to be messing with when you have this. You've got your bass setting, which actually these knobs have clicks. The bass, just this one and just this one has the click. These don't have a center click, which is fine. But you've got your main bass and your main treble knobs, which these are active all the time, even when the graphic EQ is active. You've got a boost on the bottom for the bass, just like you have a bright boost right here. And essentially this, turned all the way down, would be considered a mid boost. So everything has kind of a step up boost, which I think is kind of cool. If you go back into here, you've got the activation for the EQ. So if this versatile EQ, if you want to use it, you turn it on, and you can actually turn it off. And the reason that you want to have this off is in the run and the gun fly situations where you just want a bass and treble setting. You want to keep everything at 12 o'clock, or maybe you have something that's that is really complicated in your graphical settings, in your graphic EQ setting, where it's only active at one set, one part of your set. You activate it right here, and that's all. That's good. But these knobs remain activated even when this EQ is active, and when you have it off, of course, these serve as your main equalization knobs. The graphic EQ itself goes from 40 Hertz to 3.2 kilohertz, which gives you a nice 9-band graphic EQ. It doesn't go all the way down to the 20 Hertz and doesn't go all the way up to the 20K, but it gives you a nice mid-range of upper bass, lower treble EQ, where you can you really get in there and mess with the bass, mess with the treble, and mess with the mids. And that was actually something that I really wanted with an amplifier, because I am only planning on having one head wherever I go. So this amp needs to be able to generate as many tones as possible by itself, so that I don't have to get different things for different styles of music. And the key to doing that is having a graphic EQ like this, whether I need something that's more on the high end, whether I need something that's more on the mid-range, whether I'm playing somewhere that that is too bassy and I need to kind of run down some of the bass frequencies, but I do need some bass. So I just, I keep one frequency up and I boost, or I cut the other frequencies. So this is really nice. Of course, it does take some tweaking, and if you don't have the time to do that, and it's at a, they're set up really crazy, you of course can turn that off and just use the designated knobs that are given to you, which of course is also really cool, because there are bass heads that have this as a mandatory thing, and everyone knows that one EQ setting in an area is not going to be the same in another area. So it's nice to have the fact, or the option, to kind of get rid of that. And of course at the end you've got your post gain, which is the volume of the amplifier itself. and there is a DDT, and what this does is it's a protection clip light, and this basically tells you if you're about to clip. And I recommend all amps have this. It's actually really good because it'll let you know if the speaker is about to blow, and it has saved me very many times. It stays on even when you're not audibly clipping. You won't be able to hear it, but there's times where there's frequency that are going into these speakers that they can't handle, so that light will come on immediately, letting you know that something's wrong, so you can assess the situation. And below that, you've got what I have mixed feelings about, and I'll talk later about in the video, but it says Cosmos B here, but it's an octaver, and in some of these heads it actually says octaver, and it's just an onboard effect which gives you a lower octave below the note that you're playing. The tracking on it isn't that great. Again, I'll talk about that later in the video, but that is right over here, and again, that has its own activation switch. I wish that this came with a foot switch, because obviously it does have settings on here that you would want to have on and off at certain situations. In a live setting, they are on board for you to use. In a practical situation, though, again, I don't see myself going back to my amp when I am playing live, because if you play live, you know that you don't have time to do much. You play a 30-minute set, you rehearse for a 30-minute set, but you don't think about the fact that you're going to be talking to the audience for a little bit, and there's a little bit of sound check in there, so you're always going over. Not enough time to come back and switch all this stuff up, so I would like for them to include a foot switch. There is a lot of features that are going on in here, and there is the option to get rid of those features so that you can kind of go on the fly and use the simpler settings for this amp. Looking at the back here, you've obviously got your AC plug input adapter, which is just your basic one that will come with it. Over here you've got a fuse, which is really good, and this I have popped in not this amp, but I have in a few other heads, so it's good to have this. Saves you a lot of money. On this side, you'll see that there are two inputs for Nutrix Speak-On cables, which these are generally a little bit more expensive, but obviously high quality, and those fit in there. But you can also fit in 1/4-inch input, so these two go in there, and people actually don't see this because it doesn't look like it can, and it actually doesn't even address that in here, but yeah, you can do that. You've got an effects loop, which which is of course good for your timed effects, your delays, things like that, your choruses. The remote switch, which of course does not come with this, gotta get that separate online, but there is your input for that. A tuner send, which is of course good for rack mount tuners. Run that in the back so you don't have to have that in your rig, so designated tuner send. This is actually really cool. And a direct interface, which this is one of the coolest things about this head and about getting a separate head like this. And this is so that you can go straight into the front of the house and send a clean bass signal to wherever you may need to without having to mic anything, without having to run the cabinets or do anything. Of course, the cabinets will run separately into this so that you'll be able to hear the amp itself, but this will be able to go out, and you can use that for the PA, or you can also use it for recording into a mixing board. You can run direct into a mixing board using the exact same input, and just kind of run into a cabinet for reference. And that has its own ground lift in the back as well, so they have taken into consideration that the direct interface does need a ground lift at times. And you've got a 1/4-inch auxiliary, which I assume is just in case you want to run something into the amplifier, like a CD player or any kind of a power amplifier, music, that kind of stuff, just to make it loud and to have a graphic EQ in front. That I'm sure that you won't use many times, but it is good because if you find some retro vintage rack mount units where they use your amp as a loudspeaker. You don't have to run it into your rig and kind of compensate for it. You can just use this auxiliary in the back. But again, it's nice that they've thought of things like that. And then that is kind of tucked away all the way onto the right side.
We're going to look at how this amp sounds. I'm going to just run a couple bass lines, things like that. I'm going to try to get into really moving the knobs. I like to show people what things do by hitting a single note. Try to play something very, very, very simple whenever I try to demo something. I don't want to play a crazy bass line. Even the best things that I know, I don't want to do that. I don't want to. Andy Irvine, he's a great bassist. He's a spokesperson for Warwick, and he does Warwick reviews. But he sounds so great on every instrument that it makes it seem like that is going to be that's how it's going to sound like in your hands. I like to just kind of to do some of the simplest things, maybe even hit just a single note and go through how the dynamics of the amp is going to work. That way, when you play the notes and you can make them sound however you want in your music. You know exactly what these knobs are going to do, because my job isn't to come up with bass lines for you. My job is to show you what this is going to do to your bass lines. All right, for the review and what I think of it, I've had this amp for a lot of years, and I've run this amp with a single cabinet. I've run this direct into interfaces, things like that. So I've had a very good amount of time with it, and right off the bat, I will say that it is built very well for what it is. The front end of it, when it's exposed, when it's open, this is built awesomely. I wish more amps in this price range were built like this, because there are, you'll see like GK, even Mark Bass. You look at the front of it, some of it's made out of plastics and things like that. Things that if you're paying that much for it, shouldn't be made like that. So the build quality is very good. Sound quality, I bought it because it's versatile. Now I say that because of the graphic EQ. I can really dial in what this amp's going to sound like from the bass line, or the basis of the actual amplification, and then I can go down and find my tone and my on the pedal board, or I can find it on the bass. But the graphic EQ gives me that that sort of go, and I can reach in there for not only situations where I need to get a good tone, but a situation where I'm playing in stages, on stages that aren't cooperating with me on certain frequencies, on the treble side or on the bass side. And that's very cool. And the fact that I can bypass it because, I don't always have the time to go in, and really do that sound check, I can just use the basic EQ setting that's on there. That was a huge plus for me. The fact that in this price range, nothing was digital on there. I didn't need anything that was kind of preset graphic-wise. I didn't need all that. There was, at the time, there was the Line 6 HD 400. I didn't need all that crap, so I needed something like this where everything, it's a true amplifier, it's solid state, and the fact that it was, not just that it's built well, but it's as versatile as I need it to be. As far as the cons go, it does, obviously with a lot of use, you do find things that you you don't like about it. I wish that for maybe $50 more it came with a foot switch, because it's got all these great features up front that I'm not going to be able to access unless I go back into the amp. And when I'm rocking out on stage, I like to stay up front. I don't like to come back to the amp very much. So I don't use most of this in a live setting. When I'm practicing, when I'm in this room, when I'm doing jamming and all that kind of stuff, I'm more on my pedal board, switching things on there rather than doing stuff on here. So I really wish that there was maybe like a foot switch that was compatible with this, that came with it. Again, that's just something that I kind of say with most of the things I review. I wish that for a little bit more money it came with a certain accessory. But it really just kind of cuts away from the fact that I don't really use many of the great features that are sort of kind of finessed onto the amp, which I would really like. Another thing is that they've generously added the Cosmos B, which is an octaver, and I do use this sometimes on my high notes, and I have a noise suppressor that I kind of pair with it, but it's not very useful as far as tracking goes. If you're just going to be using this by itself, I get very many blurry notes, even when I'm playing up high, past the 15th fret. That octaver is... It's adequate, it's nice. I've been able to kind of mute the strings enough and work with the decimator so that I can kind of get a usable tone out of it, but as far as a live situation, I'm not going to be able to kind of go back to that. So if I want an octaver, it's going to be worth it to me to get a separate octaver, and kind of just have this as a recording novelty, if anything. Just kind of use that as, maybe if I want to play with an octaver and I don't have one on my pedal board, I might just click that on, do everything I want to the bass to make the octaver work, and sit down with an interface and maybe play for a few hours and see if I can write something with that. Other than that, though, I don't understand, or not understand, but I don't see the octaver being a part of my arsenal of sound. But it is a great feature that they have added, so that you do kind of get to play around with that. I would have rather they would have put a compressor in there, if anything. If you're going to put something in there that's going to be a major part of the amp, I would rather a compressor than that. But it's a great add-on nonetheless. Alright, so if you guys have any questions about this head or amplification or anything like that, comments down below. Get at me on Facebook, Twitter, get at me on Google+, all that stuff. It's connected to my YouTube. Subscribe if you guys want to stay on the latest. Thank you very much for watching. I will catch you guys next time.